After the public execution of George Floyd, I really saw a need and a gap, particularly for us here in Australia. It's not a conversation that we often have, Jess. In fact, if anything, it's the big elephant in the room that we all avoid.
Hello, Annie. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much, Jessica.
I know that we have so much that I am just so honored to have you on to speak about and so many important topics. But what I would love to start with is a little bit about your story and your journey to get you to where you are today.
Yes, so I am originally from Kenya. I came to Australia about 23 years ago as an international student. And the idea was simply to study and head back home promptly. But I fell in love with this beautiful country and decided to stay. Made my way into the corporate world, doing human resource management. And it wasn't until I became a mom that I felt I wanted more. I felt like I needed to do more, and I started thinking a lot about legacy. And storytelling is something that I was always drawn to and wanting to tell our stories, particularly of migrants of color and our stories of rising, because in the media, the stories that are told are always synonymous with struggle as far as it comes to, Black Africans. And so I wanted to change the narrative there. And so in doing that, I was pulled into coaching and I studied to become a coach. I became qualified and certified. And it was in doing that work with migrant women of color that I noticed a gap in our coaching and personal development industry, in that there wasn't much by way of diversity, equity, and inclusion, particularly when it comes to representation of people of color. And so, after the public execution of George Floyd, I really saw a need and a gap, particularly for us here in Australia. It's not a conversation that we often have, Jess. In fact, if anything, it's the big elephant in the room that we all avoid, and we kind of classify it as cultural or ethnic awareness. And there is a fair bit to do with our First Nations people in terms of education, but there isn't when it comes to race and issues to do with racism. And so I really felt called to talk more about representation, and particularly how coaches, creatives, consultants can be more inclusive in their businesses. And so that is what I do as a diversity, equity, and inclusion coach for online business owners.
Really, it is that elephant in the room. I think you just hit the nail on the head with that. And so that is why we're having this conversation today, to break down some of those barriers around having these conversations and being able to implement more of the things that you teach on in our businesses as well. So, while we're on this topic, for people who are maybe new to this or wanting to implement more of this into their businesses, what would you say representation means to you, and inclusion and all of these amazing things?
Representation to me, Jess, means being able to see myself represented. When I see you talking about the services that you have, does it have inclusive language that lets me know that somebody like me is included in that marketing? When I look at your platform, when I land into your virtual home, is there anything that indicates to me that according to your values, you're an inclusive leader? Because sometimes images don't always tell the full story. Sometimes it could be stock images, or you just don't have clients of color, but you do want to be of service to them. How can you communicate that? And so I look at language. We look at language as people who are marginalized and are not represented. And so the reason why inclusion is so important is that it tells me that you want to serve me. It tells me that you're not just wanting to see a certain group of people grow and improve their life and step into their potential and make a difference and impact. That you want to do this for others who come from different backgrounds, because this is where we stop subscribing to the dominant culture and the dominant narrative, and we see how can we make a difference to all people's lives and still be able to speak to that ideal client, because an ideal client is not somebody who is white. It is actually somebody who has values that are aligned. What are the things that connect us? How heart centered are we, and how alike are we from the values and the things that we believe in? And once you begin to look at things from that perspective, you begin to understand there's a whole entire demographic, a whole group of people that you haven't been catering to, and you could do better in that area.
Yes. So when it comes to this, I think there's two sides of it, right? It's kind of like we need to take action. And then there's this fear, and I know you speak to this on your social media as well, around the cancel culture, or maybe saying the thing in the wrong way or using the wrong wording. And so, how can people really get started? Because I feel like that is maybe the underlying tone that I'm seeing come through in a lot of conversations online, is that people want to take that action, but maybe are afraid that they may be doing it in the wrong way. So, what advice would you have for businesses in that space?
You are right in observing that there's a lot of fear around saying the wrong thing. There's a lot of fear around cancel culture. And the thing is, the fear stems a lot of the times from things that you don't know. When you would like to take action on something, but you don't fully understand it or haven't done the work in it, it'll always feel scary. Like business, when you started business the first time, or even posting the first couple of times, you're afraid. You're like, I don't want to do the wrong thing. I don't want to put myself out there and people think something else of me when that's not me. But it takes courage, it takes practice, it takes putting yourself out there a little bit. And the same is when it comes to doing this work. You've got to spend time educating yourself, listening to a podcast like this and taking away some things, reading a book, listening to different audiobooks, so that your awareness is really heightened and you can begin to have conversations in the privacy of your home with loved ones. And what you're doing is you're exercising, you're getting that stamina to have those conversations, so that when you do see something that is not right, or an opportunity presents itself for you to talk to that issue, that you're speaking to it from a place of information, from a place of being educated, and you're not kind of fumbling your way around, that you're speaking to it with a little bit of education. And it all starts by picking up things that are of interest to you, or topics that you feel drawn to understand a little bit better.
Yes. And so, what are some practical tips? Are you able to share maybe one or two tips that people can start to maybe implement, whether it's on social media, online?
Mhm.
What are some things
Yes.
that people can tangibly take from this?
The first thing that I always tell my students and my clients is work on yourself first before you can take action on your business, before you can go and make a tangible change that can be seen. It takes doing the inner work of understanding, hey, how did I arrive here? How did I arrive at building a business that is just serving white women? How did I get here?
And how do people know if they are there? Maybe if they're not even aware that they're doing it, what are some things that people would maybe look out for to give themselves a little bit of an audit?
Yes. So looking at, for example, you take your social media and having a look at who are the people that I follow. Are they all people who look and sound like me? Because that means those are the people I'm engaging with. When I see things pop up, who am I liking? Who am I commenting on? That's a very small, slight audit. And in fact, it's something that I did very recently, where I was with a group of people and I said, okay, you take my phone, here's my Instagram feed, and I'll take yours. And let's look at the difference. And I looked at hers and it was all white. And she looked at mine and she was like, oh my goodness, I see this. I had never thought of it, because we don't often take each other's phones and look through them and see what the feed looks like, but it was clear that what I was getting was a mix. Whereas for her, whatever she's, partaking is clearly a one-sided
Yes.
narrative. So
And that is very, very evident or interesting, I guess, because what we're seeing these days is algorithms and even just online and Google, everything is crafted based on our activity. And so one person's version of reality is going to be very different to someone else's version of reality. And that is such an amazing I guess, activity and a very tangible way to say subconsciously, maybe this is the way I'm showing up online. Maybe not consciously, I'm thinking I will only engage with these accounts, but the algorithm is then playing into that activity.
absolutely, the algorithm is playing into that, and it's also being intentional. It's also going like, okay, there are a couple of people who I really like on social media, Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color, but they're not coming up on my feed. The next step I could possibly take is maybe join their mailing list. That way, there's no algorithm coming into play. They're landing in my inbox and I want to hear from them. And maybe I'm subscribing to some of their freebies that are helping me learn and be on that journey where I am doing the work and I'm not relying on my Instagram feed to take me there. I'm actually being intentional. And so that's just one way of finding out how, you're possibly blocking or doing a quick audit on who you're following and how you can do better.
Yeah, I think that is an amazing way to check check yourself and then see what's really coming up. And so once people sort of do a little bit of an audit, what are some things that they can start to look at in terms of what they are putting out? So if we're looking at engaging and sort of attracting in some of that side of things, if we look at the other end of it, where it's like the posts, the messaging, the website, the wording, the languaging that you sort of mentioned before, what are some things that people can take note of or maybe start to implement on that side?
I always say when it comes to racial equity work, you can't rush it. When it comes to inclusion, you can't rush it. It's not something that you will do for a week or so and go like, okay, I'm going to change this about my website. I'm going to use this different wording. It is such a journey that you get to where you go like, when I put this out, it felt really good, but now I know better just because of the different resources that I have been reading and trying to understand. I do have a free resource which is all about inclusive language, the do's and don'ts of inclusive language, and sharing with you some of the most common words that we use in our coaching industry and why they are potentially harmful and what an alternative would be. And just talking about the fluidity of language and how it changes from time to time. So, what we're using now might be acceptable today, but in a couple of years might be something that is deemed not appropriate or acceptable. So, it's something that it's a continual evolution. You can never quite arrive there. It's always in being in the work. So, I guess a tangible takeaway or something that I would encourage is get into the space of somebody who you want to learn from and outside of social media, get onto their mailing list because you'll always be the first to find out when they have something happening. And whatever they have, whether it's a masterclass or a freebie or whatever it is that they're promoting, you'll be able to partake of that and continue in your learning journey.
And I think that's a huge permission piece. So thank you for sharing that around. It's not just a ticket off my to-do list. It is a long-term
Mhm.
journey and we aren't meant to rush that. So thank you for sharing that. And also we will definitely put the link to that freebie in the show notes because I feel like that is just going to be so, so valuable. And secondly, then everyone can get on your mailing list and soak up so much of your goodness over there
Yeah.
as well.
And I just want to add one thing when it comes to because what the vibe I get, Jess, is that people want to solve the problem. They're like, I have noticed I don't have that inclusion or that representation. How can I quickly solve this? And the problem when you try and change things quickly without having done that inner work and being in the work is that it tends to look like virtue signaling, where you are, look how good I am. Look what I'm trying to do. It doesn't, it's not coming from a genuine place. It's what leads to being performative. And then that's where you hear people saying, oh, this is not genuine. This is just something that's being put out there so that you can look a certain way. So that's the danger in trying to do something too quickly when you're not in the work and taking your time, permission to really take your time, because there's no rush. You'd rather be telling your audience and the community that you have, you know what, I'm still learning, I'm making mistakes, but I don't want to rush this. And this is who I'm potentially learning from, that you're not being again in the default position of muted and listening and being muted and listening since 2020, that you've actually moved from being muted and that you're actually now using your voice because you're learning from different resources and people as well.
Definitely. So that leads me into then, what does allyship really look like to you then?
Mm, Allyship is messy. Allyship is uncomfortable. If you're not uncomfortable doing this work or being within my space when I'm teaching, then I'm not doing my work, because this is work that is cringe-worthy. This is heartbreaking work, but it's also necessary work for us to do this. We need to be able to craft a new future, shift the way we think, shift the lens, and move it into one that is inclusive. And so, being an ally is knowing that this comes at a cost, Jess, that it could potentially cost you clients, it could potentially cost you money, it could, cost you relationships. Being an ally is not something that is glam. It's something that is hard work, and it's not a linear curve that once you decide to do this work that you will just climb up that ladder and become stronger and stronger. But there are times when you will make mistakes. There are times when you will be faced in a situation where you feel like, I should have spoken up, but I was too afraid. And so you take a few steps back. So this is not, being an ally is a messy journey, but it is one that I believe, as somebody who teaches this work, we need to allow people grace. We need to allow people to make mistakes. And when they make the mistakes, to be there for them and to encourage them to do better, so that they're not making the same mistakes over and over again. And what I potentially see on the online space, and what is probably loudest, is when mistakes are made, that you're reprimanded for it, that you are called out in a way that, just for somebody who was potentially stepping into this work and wanting to be that ally and to lock arms, that you are suddenly, you feel like, I can't do this because I don't feel safe to do so. It feels really aggressive. And the way in which I teach and the kind of space I hold, and maybe it's because being based here in Australia, our experience is quite different. It's not in your face. We're not confronted with racism in an overt way. It's very covert. Is holding space in a way that allows people to want to be part of this work, where they know, I can come messy, I can come not knowing much, but I will be held with integrity, with respect, which will want me to stay in this work longer and to learn what it means to actually be that genuine ally who will make mistakes, undoubtedly, but will continue having that deep desire to stay in the work.
Mhm. Yes. I wanted to ask you, in terms of where you said you may lose clients, you may lose things, in what way do you see that being something where there has to be that loss around it?
Very recently, been working with a client of mine, putting together an inclusion statement for her platforms. And one of the strategies that we had was sharing it with her community and saying, look, this is my inclusion statement. And it really shares her journey of how she has become awakened into this work, what she believes in and what her commitment is as far as it goes into, DEI and the spaces she's holding and the people that she's welcoming in. And to her surprise, her mailing list, that she got so many people unsubscribing. But she is somebody who is very bold and courageous with the kind of words she uses. And she said, look, if you're not looking to build an inclusive space, if you're not looking to do this work and you're not looking to have a space where we have people who are Black, Brown, Indigenous, and people of color, then this is not the space for you. And so mass unsubscribers, but also encouraging her to say, this is making room for the right people to find you, because there will be other like-hearted, values-aligned clients who will see that and go like, I've been looking for somebody like you and haven't seen that because of how noisy the space is, but haven't seen this kind of courage and boldness from a white person. You're my person. And even from other white folks as well, who are going like, this is what we need. I want to lock arms with this other sister here so that we can do good work together. So that's how it comes. It will cost you relationships. Maybe, parents going like, oh, well, what do you mean? Why are you talking about that in that way? We don't talk about people like that, or we don't amplify these topics. We are silent about them. And so that could cause a rift with the relationships that you have on a personal scale. Maybe people who don't have aligned values and they're like, that's just not me. I just don't want to be in a space with other people of color. And soon you realize, oh, okay, so we have people who are potentially, have issues with issues of race. And it opens your eyes in a way that potentially you couldn't have imagined by sharing your values and the things that you believe in. And you thought that everybody would be on board, but in actual fact, no.
Yes, and I think that's where we have to draw the line. It's like you can sit in the middle and kind of feel like you're just being wishy-washy and maybe trying to please the masses, but then you're pleasing nobody, including yourself. So it really does come back to standing true in those values. And those people weren't the right people anyway, but you gain those deeper connections with more of the right people. And I think that is the power in the work that you do and help your clients through and get to speak to on a daily basis, which is so, so powerful.
100%. And even when you flip it and look at it from a business perspective, if you're just sitting in the middle and addressing everybody and not really niching down and speaking to one issue and speaking to it over and over and over again so that you can be known as, a contributor and a voice in that particular niche and space, then you're talking to nobody. The same is with, when it comes to issues of social justice, issues of representation. If you're just sitting there not saying anything, then you're neither here nor there. And you've got to draw that line in the sand. And what are you known for? What do people know you for? What are the things you stand for? What are the things you do not stand for? And that's so important, particularly in a noisy online space where we're all trying to have our voices heard.
Yes. Oh, I think there is so, so much, but I know we are only just scratching the surface. So if people would like to get into your world and really deep dive and learn a lot more about this, we are obviously going to pop that beautiful free resource in the show notes, but where else can they find you and just really get to soak up more of your wisdom in this space?
Sure. So the place I spend most of my time is on Instagram. My handle is Uplifting Studios TV, and I'm always sharing lessons, client lessons, questions I've been asked. I jump on there and I do videos, and that's how I like to teach, through videos. So come along and check out my highlights. There's so many lessons to learn. And if you feel called to join my mailing list, I am in there on a weekly basis, sharing some really valuable content, taking you from being that bystander to somebody who really wants to be a change maker.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so, so much for sharing everything with us today. And we'll pop all those links in the show notes. But thank you. It has been a pleasure just connecting with you and getting to share this message on this platform as well.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Jess. Pleasure.